Alarms sounded throughout drifting warships, breaking the uneasy stillness of the cosmic battlefield. The outline of a colossal human ship pulled itself out of hyperspace, a deadly silhouette dwarfing lesser vessels. The alien admirals froze in shock. The tide had turned. Humanity had arrived. Panic seized the stars fully. News of the human warship's arrival exploded with urgent dispatches from every corner of the galaxy. Humanity's presence was so often overlooked in the past. Small trade vessels, small colonies, undistinguished technologies seemed to be their defining potential. But this new craft blew up all those assumptions in an instant of terror. Sensor stations on disputed frontiers disappeared before they could send final warnings. Patrol frigates, used for decades to chase away lesser threats, broke apart under unstoppable beams. Sonic booms reverberated through the old world. Alien leaders gathered emergency councils on their distant homeworlds. Towering, holographic displays showed fragmented scans of the warship's silhouette, extrapolated from its last moments bearing down on failed outposts. Experts squinted at readings that defied standard logic. The signature of energies that the vessel bore outstripped the descriptions preserved in the annals of known starfaring histories. The more they studied, the more it became clear they were outmatched. Fear rippled through once proud fleets. In huge, orbital fortresses, admirals shouted contradictory commands. Deploy more interceptors. Fall back to safer lines. Revive latent superweapons. There was no one strategy that guaranteed real success. As the panic swept, new alliances were born among the rival empires, each hull seeking a solution. They all knew a grim truth, that this human warship was a threat none of them had ever encountered. Tales of lesser skirmishes trickled in. Enhanced bombardment weapons described by survivors cut right through the armor of capital ships like sheets of foil. They described sophisticated deflection that shrugged off entire missile salvos. One officer who survived the nightmare claimed that the warship moved as if it knew his every maneuver, attacking exactly at the moment a defense slipped. Exaggerated or not, these stories fattened an aura of terror that overwhelmed rational planning. Speculation ricocheted through galactic networks. Humans may have discovered remnants of a lost civilization had they mastered warp fields that were deemed impossible. Each guess had implications that rattled core assumptions about the limits of technology. Yet more signals blinked out close to the warship's path, indicating that it continued its advance without slowing. In its unpredictability, vast tracts of alien territory prepared for total war. In gilded throne rooms, council members debated rash treaties or desperate quarantines. Some called for simulated submission to stall for time, others for a full-scale strike before the warship moved closer. With every hour came new confusion. The relentless rate of destruction signaled that humanity no longer followed old rules. Coordinated tactics that had once tamed rebellious star systems now backfired with devastating consequences. It was then that fear reached an unimaginable scale. Merchant fleets forsake trade lanes, choking ports trying to avoid prospective theaters of battle. Civilian populations braced for the worst. Whole colonies instituted desperate evacuations, trying to outrun a cataclysm whose mechanics they barely grasped. Those who once mocked the relatively paltry aspects of life on Earth suddenly hung onto every innuendo about the warship's inevitable approach. To the dismay of military tacticians, this one vessel had penetrated the largest defensive circle in recorded time. Fortresses that had withstood entire armadas collapsed in minutes. Networks of satellites blinked offline with not a shot fired. Hastily dispatched fleets fared no better, their communications fading to static mid-battle. Grizzled admirals who had brought countless enemies to their knees now were faced with a nightmare that tore apart their illusion of control. And so panic spread. Timetables compressed. The most fanciful fortress worlds desperately tried to reinforce shields or replaced cannons. Secret weapons once considered too destructive for routine use were now in the mix. No empire wanted to sit on its hands while the unyielding shadow of a manned warship approached. As they prepared for war, a chilling question haunted alien leaders. If that terrifying ship was only the dawn of humanity's new age, what more might come? The crew made preparations in the fortified corridors of the human warship for the final battle that would decide the fate of Earth. The ship itself was the culmination of innumerable sacrifices. Fragments of extraterrestrial technology repurposed in secret research facilities, now harmonious with human ingenuity. From advanced propulsion drives to the multi-layered energy shields, each subsystem bore testament to humanity's indomitable will. With a reactor producing staggering amounts of fuel at the center of the craft, it powered the widest array of the weapons Earth had ever created. Long rows of rail cannons would line their hull, capable of firing slugs at speed files that left conventional armor irrelevant. Coaxial plasma emitters drew on stellar temperatures to roast capital ships in seconds. Complementing these devices of destruction were specialty modules whose purpose was communications jamming and targeting scrambling. The result was a vessel that could outgun, outrun, and outthink just about any enemy. But this hardware alone wasn't the reason observers called it unstoppable. Crew members had been the true driving force behind the craft. Many had lost homes in previous alien incursions or suffered captivity on conquered colonies. They were fearless in their determination. In every console station, from engine control to the tactical bridge, humans held patterns in common. They would not surrender again. If the galaxy wanted war, then humanity would answer the call with no hesitation. On Earth, whole populations staked everything they had on this expedition. The economic devastation and strains on resources left no room for second tries. The warship embodied a desperate gamble, a final stand to earn respect or win freedom. Failure here brought not just death, but death that the empires would not let lie. But if it broke through the enemy lines, then humanity might reclaim its place among the stars. Intelligence reports had begun to assess the extent of the opposition as the ship traveled through hyperspace lanes, detecting fleets, fortress planets performing a cannon lining with guns old and new, and reformed alliances bent on containing the intrusion. Pockets of battered survivors from the warship's earlier forays insisted that these measures would be unsuccessful. The irreversible quality of the craft's assaults appeared to violate all earthly logic. All three sectors left a trail of smoldering detritus, once deemed invulnerable. Tension throbbed within the vessel's bulkheads. The crew knew their advantage wouldn't last indefinitely. Each battle sapped valuable reserves of power. The warship's shields and disruptive beams made great demands for energy, and so it had to be carefully rationed. So every swing needed to matter. They did not have the luxury of extended stalemates or costly shots fired at decoys. Accuracy and speed were top priorities. Each nugget reverberated with tacit certainty. Final calibrations were run on the four thrusters, designed to execute audacious evasive maneuvers, with pilots verifying the results. Gunnery crews practiced contingency plans for surprise ambushes. Engineers prepared emergency protocols to mitigate partial meltdown. Morale soared, not through arrogance, but a bond forged through desperation and loyalty. They knew Earth had faith in them, and that faith propelled them into every move. As sensors showed they had entered the main battle area, the warship slowed, searching for ambushes. Information gathered from infiltration drones indicated that the enemy had concentrated formidable lines of warships. Some were decades old, but others were recently commissioned dreadnoughts with cutting-edge hull plating. This final showdown would be a test of humanity's greatest creations. One misstep could derail weeks of planning. But none of the voices aboard faltered, despite the stakes. The warship settled into position, systems humming at full readiness. Stealth fields shimmered, obscuring the craft's approach. Thousands of enemy signals flickered across displays, indicating a dense blockade ahead. A final hush settled. Then, with steady resolve, the crew locked on targets. A storm prepared to be unleashed by humanity's last hope. With one species' defiance, the galaxy had not seen the unstoppable might of one species. The galaxy was about to see Earth's greatest stand. The human warship exploded out of hyperspace into a sector churned with alien fleets, the battlefield crackling with tension. Defensive lines wove across the void, cruisers and battleships in stacked formations. Its blaring turrets tracked the warship as soon as it suddenly appeared. Then, without waiting, the human craft delivered its first volley. Gleaming streaks of light ignited the dark sky. Rail cannon slugs blasted apart the leading edge of the enemy blockade, shredding hull plating at terrifying velocities. Whole corvette squadrons evaporated in the hurricane. In seconds, calls across alien comm channels began to light up in shock, many voices choking over disbelief. They'd built a fortress of metal, and it collapsed under the first human bombardment. Alien admirals scrambled to plan a counterstrike. Fighters swarmed off of carriers, firing volleys of homing missiles. Towering capital ships pointed massive beam arrays, blasting energy bolts that could vaporize asteroids. From afar it looked like 100 suns bursting upward. But the warship bobbed and weaved with unnatural grace, its advanced thrusters twirling around deadly beams. Missiles that achieved a partial lock engaged a layered energy shield, bursting into radiant flares. In alien flagships, crew members crowded around monitors, studying slices of data on the human craft. Each fresh reading defied previous expectations. The warship's shielding had peaked way above expected thresholds. Its propulsion profile broke established speed limits. Still worse, it timed its attack to maximum effect, squeezing through tiny holes between the blockade's defenses. As the Relentless pushed forward, great portions of the blockade crumbled into rout and disarray. Others hoped to regroup deeper into friendly lines, concluding that only a strategic withdrawal could buy time. But the warship would not permit that. It shot crippling ion bursts that cooked propulsion systems, stranding whole pockets of ships. Then came plasma cannons, incinerating vessels that had once constituted the backbone of the blockade. Lifeless ships called for answers. 2 systems had already suffered near decimation, and a pack of alien dreadnoughts had gathered, mashing themselves together, mean and vicious, into a wedge. They released coordinated salvos of beam fire, saturating the warship's path. The universe burned with deadly currents. For a time, no craft appeared likely to survive that tempest. In the human ship, alarms began to blink red in indication of stress on the shields. Then the Unstoppable released its drone fighters loaded with a smaller rail turret. And then they flanked the dreadnoughts from unexpected quarters, sowing havoc behind their lines. The wedge formation collapsed as the Unstoppable barreled through the middle. Alien commanders, watching through unseen command centers, felt a frigid realization: their doom loomed. Few were veterans of centuries of warfare. Few among them had ever seen such fluid tactics or savage firepower. They attempted to call for reinforcements from nearby systems, but transmissions were jammed or came too late. The human warship overpowered the local network, filling channels with noise. A communication breakdown sped up the panic. Under constant pressure, complete enemy formations collapsed. Lifeboats streamed from riven hulls, their pilots compounding annihilation with surrender. Some continued the fight, launching final torpedoes that sputtered against the warship's resilient shield. And every effort to build a new defensive perimeter was crushed by pinpoint beams, which blew apart the flagship's vital components. Once the bridge modules, or reactor cores, the other them shorting out shield generator after shield generator. With each alien retreat, more ground was laid open. Industrial barges, logistical hubs, and valuable sensor stations fell silent. The proud blockade of species had become the toiling drive shaft of some half-mechanical monstrosity of the void, a freaking graveyard of God. Twisted hulls of injured ships sent drifting and dying sparks. The unquenchable pressed onward, systematic yet deadly. In the interim, surviving captains passed around desperate texts for any irreversible action that could put an end to this horror. A moment of utter terror gripped the alien ranks when the warship's main cannon, a terrible machine said to draw on gravitational distortions, charged for the first time. The observers watched as the space around the cannon distorted, and then a pulse erupted, cleaving a heavy battleship in two. The torn halves sputtered away, crying atmosphere and tossing panicked crew into the void. That one shot led even the most stalwart defenders to believe they were up against an apocalyptic threat. Renewed efforts at a unified pushback collapsed in terror. Some ships hammered random coordinates, uncertain of where Unstoppable would position next. Others turned around in the hope of fleeing the region entirely. The Irrepressible trudged on. The blockade's morale crumbled under its attack. Reptilian admirals who had bellowed orders with conviction cowered in disbelief at the unstoppable tide of human anger. With the last few clusters of defenders collapsing, The warship snipped the anchor points of the blockade, cutting off lanes of engagement. A cascade of secondary explosions rippled over the field, radiating shock waves through billowing debris. The oncoming behemoth pushed through the last billow of debris as through a fog, framed and distant. Starlight. Terror throbbed in each enemy officer's heart. The first skirmish was done, and mankind had triumphed handily. But the warship's assignment was not yet fulfilled, and it kept going, indomitable, toward the deeper lines where fresh battles would be fought. Reeling from the catastrophic defeat at the blockade, alien high councils scrambled to put together one last, great counteroffensive. Desperate meetings in concealed war rooms culminated in a plan that amalgamated their mightiest dreadnoughts, fresh-minted star killers, and fleets of stealth bombers. Diplomats negotiated fragile truces among warring empires, hastily assembling a coalition of the unwilling to face the inevitable juggernaut of human death. If this unified force failed, the belief was their civilizations would collapse. Across the front, fleets withdrawn from defensive positions rushed to converge on a strategic system notorious for its gravity anomalies. There, wily tacticians planned to lure the human warship into a trap. They laid small planetoids with advanced gravity well projectors, hoping to constrain the vessel's movement. Artillery platforms lay cloaked behind thick asteroid belts, loaded with stellar warheads rumored to be able to breach even the strongest shields. This final stand was powered by pride and rage. News of the plans circulated quietly among alien fleets. Morale, however, was fragile despite official hype. Survivors from earlier battles told of unstoppable beams and unstoppable maneuvers that rent entire flotillas. Yet with the fate of the Empire on the line, they had little option. Armadas filled the system by the dozens, forming a never-before-seen ring of starships. Tens of thousands of cannons targeted inward, prepared to unleash a tempest of raw firepower. Eventually, scanner beacons lit up. There was a human warship just coming through the outer rim of the system. One commander after another braced themselves. They let little vanguards on the outsides engage first, hoping to bribe the warship deeper into the trap zone. The uncatchable countered as expected, thinning out the attacking defenders with calculated ruthless efficiency. Then, as scheduled, the Allied fleets activated the gravity wells at the same moment. A powerful gravitic wave washed through local space. Small asteroids wandered away from their normal courses, slamming together in haphazard explosions. The output of the Unstoppable's thrusters jumped as it struggled against the impromptu morass. For a moment, the alien line watched as the warship visibly slowed. They opened a coordinated barrage from all the big guns. Missiles, beams, and rail spikes flew, saturating the area in a haze of energy. On many bridges, officers gazed upon the naked conflagration with grim hope. But that hope disappeared within seconds. The shield of the Indomitable flared with light, scattering the bulk of the attack. Some explosions gouged searing lines into the hull, but internal systems compensated, sealing up compromised sections. The warship then accelerated again, demonstrating that no artificial gravity sinkhole could hold it for long. Its forward rails rolled like a Vespa, severing the power relays of the hidden planetoid projectors. The gravity wells were failing, one by one. Undeterred, the Allied fleets unleashed swarms of stealth bombers. It was in undercloaking fields and on a combination alien and experimental technology equipped with high-yield warheads. The message, an unstoppable, was rocked by a barrage that truly penetrated sections of its shielding. Observers saw arcs of electrical discharge skimming down the warship's spine. Crew on the Ally side cheered, until the Unstoppable dropped an electromagnetic pulse. The shockwave fried cloaking devices, exposing the bomber's positions in a snail's trail of destruction. The vulnerable craft erupted into pieces under fire from the defensive turrets. Sticking with the plan, the Allied dreadnoughts charged. They made a ring of overlapping beams to cut the intruder off. They unleashed heavy cannon fire from multiple directions, redoubled salvos driving the Unstoppable's shield to its limits. For the first time, the warship eased its pace, taking several sustained hits that vibrated through even its hardened plating. Across extraterrestrial channels, excitement buzzed. Was this the time when they finally stopped the Unstoppable? That optimism vanished when the warship fired an untested weapon. A ripple of glimmering distortion radiated from its hull, scrambling sensors and raising target locks. Dreadnoughts no longer knew precisely where the intruder was. Even cutting-edge targeting software gave conflicting readings. In the confusion, the Unstoppable zeroed in on the largest dreadnought, boring an intensity lance that literally bisected its reactor core. A massive blast devoured nearby escorts, losing a quarter of the ring's firepower in a single catastrophic bloom. The rest of the Allied lines, shocked by the blast, remained wavering. One day, conversations boiled down to frantic phone calls. Some admirals, believing the situation was hopeless, ordered an immediate withdrawal, abandoning less mobile ships. Others soldiered through, blasting off final salvos in a blind rage. The unrivaled floated out of sequence. Through the carnage, methodically immobilizing each craft that held decent formation. Each rail hit punched holes into hulls with surgical precision. Understanding that they were doomed, groups of Allied captains made suicide charges. They steered injured cruisers at the Unstoppable, hoping a bang of an impact might do what more advanced weaponry could not. But the warship's barrier was too powerful. Every effort ended in searing blossoms of vaporizing metal, and the path of the Unstoppable went unblocked. The last wave of Allied reinforcements panicked and arrived late, greeted with gutted main fleets. Conceding grimly that the day was lost, they turned the other way, unwilling to be slaughtered. The Unstoppable had flown free of the system's failing gravity traps, its hull wounded, yet still lethal. This last-ditch gamble, the largest mobilization in alien history, had not succeeded in halting man's unstoppable vessel. Those who survived would always remember the ceaseless slaughter that rent their noble fleets asunder. And the warship, with Earth's last hope aboard, moved on without a backward glance. Unencumbered by the pathetic remains of the global counteroffensive, the human warship appeared at the very mouth of the alien empire's capital sector. Here, encircled by ancient defense grids and titanic battle stations, was the heart of galactic power. For millennia, no uneradicable adversary had crossed these ultimate lines. Their guardians wielded unstoppable armies, until now. As the Unstoppable peeled away from the faster-than-light transit route, fortress stations brought targeting locks to bear with lethal intent. A single massive targeting system combining planetary cannon arrays and orbital platforms. The Empire's top leaders, sitting in deep bunkers, threw everything out there. City block-sized lasers, multi-stage torpedoes for planetary assault, and an unrelenting hammering of shock lances hammered the warship from all angles. A blinding halo erupted around the intruder's shield, pulses radiating outward as if a second sun. For a moment it appeared even this indestructible machine might buckle beneath such a savage storm. Aboard Earth's war vessel, red alerts blared, corridors vibrated, and some secondary compartments lost pressurization. But the crew continued, rerouting power to critical shield nodes. Engine conduits glowed white, at full burn. Well, then the Unstoppable struck back. Rail cannons sang a chorus of slugs that pounded. Fortress stations with unimaginable force. Complete modules, ripped free, tumbling toward nowhere. Some stations made an effort to switch things up and provide new plating, but the Unstoppable took advantage of every opportunity. The impact set off explosions that reverberated throughout the capital sector. The previously impenetrable defensive ring began to fray. From behind those battered stations, the Empire's ultimate armada soared into the void. Command vessels, regal in design, progressed alongside squadrons of smaller cruisers and corvettes. They fired continuously, stacking beam on beam. The Invincible fought back with controlled bursts of plasma. Scorching arcs of energy lanced out at multiple targets, cleaving them apart in perfect time to the detonations. Observers watching from the surface of the capital planet could hardly believe their eyes. It had flames dancing where strongholds had once assured everlasting security. Battered but far from broken, the cast of characters who would be unstoppable executed its decisive plan. A specialized warhead, a horrific mutt of human engineering and reverse design alien technology, lifted off from concealed bays. It raced toward the largest fortification station, skirting through flak bursts. Defensive turrets struggled to intercept it. The warhead separated in the final moments into several submunitions, each of which targeted critical station systems. The subsequent chain reaction encased local space in a raging inferno. Watching their best stronghold disappear in an instant, the survivors faltered. Some lost hope, drifting back instead of confronting certain doom. Others, led by diehard zealots unwilling to retreat, pressed on, firing wave after wave of torpedoes. The never-stopping showed no mercy. Salvos of superheated plasma cannons cut corridors through whole fleets. But the intruder pressed unflinchingly forward, its mission unbound by the dangers of capacitor. Shield capacitors dangerously drained, shields down. At last, the impossible cast its eyes towards the prime command platform of the Empire, a titanic shell in orbit, under which the High Council marshaled the all-armies. Dozens of smaller defense turrets spat bolts in a desperate final stand. The warships circled overhead, unleashing precision strikes that smashed shield relays and generator towers. Explosive decompressions ripped the platform's decks apart, hurling entire battalions into the void. This was the heart of the Empire, and chaos reigned. A last cruel blow sealed their fate. The ineffable channeled vast energy into a focused beam that punched through the platform's central rod. A massive fireball spread out, consuming the structure. From within, the signs were cut off, and the unified empire appeared to have lost all support in that moment of despair. Surviving ships fled in blind panic, each crew determined to save itself. In the sector, sensor by sensor, the once vibrant mapping of the capital faded to gray, bloodied but unbowed. The ship floating above the burned and broken wreckage, with the chain of command clearly destroyed. Thousands of wrecks shimmered with residual flames. Active fleets turned in place at full thrust, deliberately disobeying calls for a group up. They wanted nothing more to do with this unstoppable doom. Far below, on the surface of the capital planet, watchers beheld the last flickers of their orbital guardians burn out. In bunkers, high officials gaped in silence, doom sealed by the impervious craft above. So some attempted to coordinate emergency protocols, but none arrived. Its power had been unraveled in one unstoppable campaign. In the silence that ensued, the inescapable pulled away from the immediate gravitational pull, flooding the scene with an arc of ruin no human record can match. The Empire's final redoubt, which had once been praised as invulnerable, had fallen. The unsummoned had dealt the final blow, altering the power balance of the galaxy forever. The only sound left was that of warships fleeing in panic, or a single vessel putting its foot to the floor. Silence fell upon a battlefield littered with shattered terminals and burning hull remnants. Where an empire's unflagging might had once held sway, only drifting rubble bore witness to the violent contest. Twisted metal sparkled in the light of distant suns, and the arcs of static crackled over gutted hulls. The irrevocable human war machine had achieved its objective, and in so doing, brought down the galactic panorama's most dominant regime. Over the following days, timid scouts crawled out onto the wreckage, sending back shaky images to far-off worlds. No single power had ever conceived that in one single craft could dismantle entire fleets in this fashion. But the evidence drifted through the firmament, irrefutable. Alien demographics, who had been coerced into paying homage to the Empire for centuries, celebrated in a low-key manner. Some even hoped that for the planets under their boot, those planets could finally taste freedom without the oppressive yoke of a seemingly invincible overlord. Back at sea, the indomitable warship retreated towards safer coordinates, healing the wounds of so many battles. Plating glowed from reactor strain, and internal compartments needed emergency repairs. The crew exchanged weary grins, knowing they had pulled off the impossible. They had established Earth's place in a new order, one that offered humans equality, if not indomitable champions, among the cosmic powers. Across the galaxy, the rumor mill churned. Some mocked the unstoppable warship as a myth dreamed up by despairing insurgents. Others spoke of humans who entered into secret contracts with hidden ancients. A handful argued that Earth must have cracked technology that eluded members. But underneath all speculation was one truth. The Unstoppable had shown that no empire could claim immunity when confronted by an indomitable spirit underpinned by relentless innovation. clans of the Empire made desperate bids to fill the power vacuum. Local warlords took up territory, emerging as self-declared successors to the old throne. Splinter fleets began forming under local strongmen, seeking to establish personal domains out of anarchy. Awe and fear mingled as each new faction observed Earth's unstoppable champion. None wanted to invite a second show of that fearsome power. On Earth, muted jubilation and reflection mingled. Politicians squabbled over how to manage the sudden leverage. Should they deepen allegiances or risk being cautious? Some worried that a runaway force might brand humans as an existential threat to be neutralized. Still others thought the show of strength ensured peace through deterrence. By radio waves, families on shattered colonies wept for lost loved ones, yet grateful for the unstoppable returning them a future free of oppression. For the crew of the warship, the pace of war was replaced by a sense of calm. Engineers worked around the clock, repairing damaged stretches with the uncertainty whether they would soon be called on to intervene in new conflicts. Intelligence reports indicated that lesser powers debated whether to oppose Earth's ascendance or pursue amicable relations. The unstoppable had turned out to be a game changer, but no one had any idea how the rest of the chapters would play out. Across the Empire's ravaged heartland, fleets floundered, with no command to guide them but the ashes of those who ruled them. Some admirals brooded about revenge, talking darkly of superweapons or secret technologies. But even they paused, aware the unstoppable had decimated their best before. Seeds of rebellion sown by the unstable's victory, traitors whispered, would take root in the cosmos, toppling other tyrants in due course. Echoes of the final battle lingered among the stars. The mangled carcasses stood as a muted tribute to the Empire's hubris and humanity's unrefined perseverance. Now clear of the feared blockade, new shipping routes opened. Strange, independent worlds touched on bring to Earth, eager for alliances. In shadowy corners, conspiracies formed, some wanting to duplicate the design of the unstoppable, others wanting to undermine the next iteration of the human touch. But irrespective of the changing alliances, one thing was clear: the unstoppable warship had altered the galactic narrative forever. A young species, once poor and enslaved by the great empires, had triumphed over the most crippling chains because its members had the courage, imagination, and unity. The unbreakable was more than a ship. It was a sign that even the deadliest tyrant could fall to resolute hands. And as the cosmos drifted into uneasy peace, observers from distant realms watched over Earth's champion. They wondered whether the unstoppable could set sail again, this time to dismantle new threats, or enforce an era of brittle cooperation. The last transmissions from the capital battlefield bore one haunting impression: the unstoppable still existed, and humanity stood poised to go up against any enemy. Tomorrow's wars could dwarf this one. For now, the galaxy stood still at the cusp of an epic that only human determination could forge, frozen in a moment of uncertainty and wonder.